Have you ever stopped to think about the last words of someone who marked the history of the world? If I told you that Pope John Paul I, one of the most influential and admired figures of the 20th century, left such a powerful message in his final moments, that it could completely change the way we see life and the future of humanity. Now tell me, if you could hear the last words of a person who inspired billions, what do you think she would say? Something about love, about faith, about the destiny of humanity. I want to know your opinion. Comment below before continuing, because throughout this video you will discover the truth, and I want to know if you can get it right. John Paul I's trajectory is one of the most fascinating stories of the modern era, from his youth marked by personal tragedies and the brutality of the Second World War to his role as the first Italian pope in more than 4 centuries. He emerged as a figure who transcended the boundaries of religion. He was not just a leader of the Catholic Church, he was a symbol of hope and resilience in a world often marked by chaos. But in the last months of his life, a mysterious detail began to circulate among those who lived most closely with him. An apparently casual comment, but which many believe was more than a simple reflection, something that seemed to point to a future of challenges and overcoming, an echo of his watered-down spiritual vision and his deep understanding of what it means to be human in times of change. A time will come when humanity will be plunged into shadows, he reportedly said in a private meeting with cardinals in the Vatican. His voice, weakened by age and illness, still carried the weight of authority and conviction. But in that moment, those who seek the light will find the strength to transform the world. The phrase was recorded in the memory of those who were present, but was interpreted in different ways at the time. The world was facing a series of challenges: increasing political tensions, the impact of post-9/11 global terrorism, and debates about the role of religion in an increasingly divided world between traditions and modernity. Some cardinals understood those words as a spiritual call to the Catholic Church, others as a message intended for all humanity, transcendent and timeless. Pope John Paul I was no stranger to visionary declarations. Since the beginning of his papacy in 1978, he frequently spoke in tones that mixed warning and hope. In one of his most famous homilies, he proclaimed, "Do not be afraid, open the doors to Christ." These words echoed as a call to faith, but also as a warning so that the world does not close itself before the unknown of the future. For it is no surprise that many interpreted his statement in the final months of his life as a kind of prophetic prediction. His ability to see beyond the present moment, to connect contemporary events with broader spiritual issues, was a defining characteristic of his papacy. But what did he want to say with a time of shadows? This question remains to this day. For some, it was a reference to the political and social challenges of the beginning of the 21st century, growing inequality, cultural conflicts, and polarization that were already beginning to emerge with force. For others, he was talking about a more personal darkness, a spiritual crisis that affects not only society, but each individual on their journey. And what to say about the light? John Paul I often associated faith with light, eason, and compassion. In his final words, when he called for the world to live for the light of Christ, he reaffirmed this central belief. But as he would have spoken months earlier, it seemed to go beyond was not just an invitation, a reminder that AZ is available to everyone, a call to action in a world where darkness often seems to dominate. The mystery surrounding these words grew after his death. Some people close to him claimed that he repeated them on different occasions, always with the same gravity and purpose. Others said that he not only spoke about a time of shadows, but also mentioned that light would be found in the most unlikely moments, in the most unexpected people. These reports, although not confirmed officially, began to circulate among the faithful and scholars, creating an almost mystical aura around his message. And to many, the context of his statement seemed to fit perfectly into the global panorama that would unfold in the following years. Now I ask you, what do you think John Paul I meant by a time of shadows? Was he referring to something specific, or was his message broader, intended to inspire anyone who heard it? Leave your reflection in the comments. Your vision can enrich this story. John Paul I's supposed prediction: a time will come when humanity will be immersed in shadows, but at that moment, those who seek the light will find the strength to transform the world, leaving a trail of reflections and interpretations. Although she was isolated only in private circles, her impact grew after her death, when the world began to face challenges that seemed to directly echo her words. But before we continue, I want to know, do you believe that the current world is facing a time of shadows? What do you think is necessary to bring light to these moments? Share your reflections in the comments. Your thoughts can inspire others. Shortly after the death of John Paul I in 2005, the world found itself in a period of transition. The beginning of the 31st century brought a sequence of events that tested the limits of humanity. The impact of the terrorist attacks of 9/11 was still felt globally, with wars and conflicts that seemed to have no end. The advance of climate change brought devastating natural disasters, while economic crises deepened inequalities and caused suffering in various parts of the world. For many, this seemed to be the time of shadows mentioned by the Pope. The feeling of uncertainty and instability grew every day. Governments seemed incapable of dealing with the challenges, and ordinary people asked themselves how to find hope in the midst of chaos. It was in this scenario that the words of John Paul I began to resonate more deeply. The multiple interpretations of light and darkness. Darkness for John Paul I was never just a metaphor for global crises. He often spoke about spiritual darkness, something that affects not only societies, but also individuals, the existential void, the loss of purpose, the distancing of values such as compassion and empathy. All of this, according to him, was part of what made these times challenging. Light, on the other hand, was more than a religious reference. Although John Paul I often mentioned Christ as the supreme source of light, he also recognized that this light could manifest itself in many ways: in altruism, in forgiveness, in the collective effort to overcome adversity. His message was not limited to the faithful, it was universal, an invitation for everyone to seek that which would guide them towards the good. Events that seemed to echo his words. In the years following his death, several global events were interpreted by many as part of the time of shadows, predicted by John Paul I. The economic crisis of 2008, for example, revealed the darker side of human greed as millions faced unemployment and despair. At the same time, solidarity movements emerged, showing that even in darkness, people were able to come together and create hope. Another striking example was the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. The world came to a standstill, millions lost their lives, and people found themselves isolated, separated from friends and family. It was a moment of darkness for humanity, but also of light. Health professionals risked their lives to save others, neighbors helped each other, and science advanced quickly to develop vaccines. In this context, John Paul I's phrase gained new relevance. The light seemed to be the collective effort, compassion, and the human capacity to face adversity with courage. A message that transcends time. While many people interpreted the Pope's words as a prediction for specific events, others believed that his message was timeless. After all, the history of humanity has always been marked by moments of darkness and light. What makes John Paul I's vision so powerful is that it invites us to reflect on our role in these moments. He seemed to say that darkness may be inevitable, but the light is always within our reach. It is up to each of us to choose how to react. This perspective resonates deeply in times of crisis. When we are forced to look within ourselves and each other for the strength to move forward, the personal impact of the message becomes more significant than a global analysis. The message of John Paul I also touches each person on an individual level. In times of personal difficulty, his vision can offer a reminder that light is not just something external, but something we carry within us. Your phrase, although addressed to the world, also seems to whisper directly to the heart of each person who hears it. You have the strength to illuminate the darkness around you. And you. Whatever your interpretation, the words of John Paul I continue to inspire. Now I ask you, where do you see the light in times of crisis? Do you believe that his words can be applied to the moment we live in today? Comment and share your opinion. Your vision is important. John Paul I, born as Karl Joseph Wojtyla, did not reach his deep understanding of light and shadows by chance. His life was a testament to resilience, spirituality, and overcoming. Since childhood, he faced tragedies that shaped not only his personality, but also his connection to faith and his understanding of the challenges of humanity. I want to hear from you. Do you believe that the challenges we face in life make us stronger? Have difficult experiences taught you important lessons? Share in the comments. Your story can inspire others to find light amidst the shadows. A childhood marked by loss. Karol Wojtyla was born on May 18, 1920, in Wadowice. He was the youngest of 3 children in a humble and deeply religious family. His childhood, however, was marked by devastating losses. His mother, Emilia, passed away when he was just 9 years old. Shortly after, he lost his brother Edmund, a young doctor, who contracted scarlet fever while treating patients. These losses shook Carroll deeply, but also brought him closer to his father, a man dedicated to prayer and faith. This environment of suffering and spirituality began to shape his worldview. He learned from an early age that life is fragile and full of challenges, but also that faith can be a source of strength and comfort. It was during these years that Carroll began to develop the idea that light can only be found when we face the darkness with courage and determination. The brutality of the war. When Carroll was 19 years old, the Second World War broke out, bringing a new wave of shadows to his life. Poland was invaded by the Nazis, and he saw his city being transformed into a camp of repression and suffering. During these years, he worked in a quarry and later in a chemical factory to avoid being deported to forced labor. But it was also during this period that he began to explore more deeply his spiritual vocation. He attended secret meetings of a group called Rhapsodic Circle. For Carroll, these meetings were a reminder that even in the midst of the darkness of war, the light of culture, faith, and humanity could resist. The call to the priesthood. In 1941, Carroll lost his father, his last direct family connection. At the age of 21, he was alone in the world. It was at that moment that he felt a stronger call to the priesthood. As the war continued to devastate Europe, he entered a clandestine seminary in Krakow. This decision was an act of courage, as priestly training was strictly prohibited by the Nazis and punishable by death. This period was crucial in shaping Carroll's view of the role of faith in times of darkness. He witnessed human brutality in its most extreme form, but also saw examples of compassion and courage that reinforced his belief in humanity's ability to find the light even in the darkest of times. The young bishop who defied regimes. After the war, Karol Wojtyla continued his spiritual journey, eventually becoming bishop and later Archbishop of Krakow. During this period, he faced a new kind of darkness, the communist regime that dominated Poland. Karol was not a conventional leader. He challenged the regime in subtle but powerful ways by organizing religious events that reaffirmed the cultural and spiritual identity of Poland. He believed that the true light came from the unity and faith of the people, and that no regime could erase this. The Pope who enlightened the world. In 1978, Karol Wojtyla was elected Pope John Paul I, the first non-Italian pope in more than 400 years. His papacy was marked by historical moments that reflected his vision of light and shadow. He played a crucial role in the fall of communism in Eastern Europe, inspiring peaceful resistance movements in Poland and other countries in the region. Traveled to more countries, yes, and united to João Paulo II, the role of the Church was to be a light in a world often divided by darkness. Lessons from a life of challenges. Throughout his life, John Paul I faced challenges that could have led many people to despair. But instead, he used these experiences to develop a unique insight into the power of light. He believed that each of us has the ability to illuminate the world around us, even when we face our own shadows. His life was a living example of how to transform suffering into strength, loss into purpose, and darkness into light. This perspective prepared him to leave profound and inspiring messages, like the supposed prediction we are exploring. John Paul I was not just a spiritual leader, he was a bridge between cultures, religions, and ideologies in a world often marked by divisions. He believed that humanity needed to unite around universal values such as compassion, forgiveness, and solidarity. This vision made him one of the most beloved and influential popes in modern history. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe that it is possible to unite people even in times of so much division? What do you think we need to achieve this union? Leave your reflections in the comments, they can inspire others. A global pope. Since the beginning of his papacy in 1978, John Paul I demonstrated that his focus was not just the Vatican, but the world. He became known as the Pilgrim Pope, visiting more than 120 countries over 26 years, a record in the history of the Catholic Church. His travels were not merely diplomatic, they were powerful gestures of connection. In each country he visited, he made a point of learning words in the local language, recognizing the cultural and religious traditions of the population, and addressing specific issues that affected the region. He believed that to unite people, it was necessary to understand them in their individuality. Interreligious dialogue. John Paul I was also a pioneer in promoting dialogue between religions. He knew that to overcome the shadows of hatred and mistrust, it was essential to create bridges between different beliefs. In 1986, he organized the first World Prayer Meeting for Peace in Assisi, bringing together leaders of different religions, including Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists. This gesture was revolutionary. It demonstrated that despite differences, religions could work together for a common goal, peace. It was a moment that directly reflected his vision that light can be found when we unite around the greater good. Forgiveness as a path. One of John Paul I's most powerful acts was his public forgiveness of the man who tried to assassinate him in 1981. After recovering from the attack, he visited Mehmet Ali Arka in prison and talked to him for about 20 minutes. This gesture of compassion and forgiveness was a living example of his belief in the transformative power of light. For John Paul I, forgiveness was not just a religious virtue, it was a practical tool for breaking cycles of hatred and violence. A defender of human rights, John Paul I believed that peace could not be achieved without justice. He was a tireless advocate for human rights, opposing totalitarian regimes and inspiring peaceful resistance movements that led to the liberation of millions of people. His support for the Polish Solidarity Union, led by Lech Walesa, was instrumental in the collapse of the communist regime in Poland and eventually in other Soviet bloc countries. John Paul II believed that freedom was an expression of human dignity, and that no one should live under oppression. A voice for the marginalized, John Paul II also cared deeply about the poor and marginalized. In his visits to developing countries, he often denounced inequality and called for governments and elites to take responsibility for caring for the most vulnerable. He believed that the light of a society was measured by how it treated its weakest members. A universal message. Although he was a religious leader, John Paul I always emphasized that his messages went beyond the Catholic faith. He spoke of universal values that could resonate with anyone, regardless of their belief or origin. His supposed prediction, a time will come when humanity will be plunged into shadows, but in that moment, those who seek the light will find the strength to transform the world, exemplifies this. He was not speaking only to Catholics, but to all humanity. He believed that each person has the potential to be a source of light in times of darkness. The lasting impact. Today, almost 2 decades after his death, the impact of John Paul I is still felt throughout the world. His actions, words, and examples continue to inspire people to seek the light even in times of difficulty. He showed us that union, dialogue, and forgiveness are not just lofty ideals, but practical ways to transform the world. The words of John Paul I, the last words he spoke on his deathbed, as the supposed prediction of a time of shadows, continues to resonate deeply in the world. They are not only remembered for their beauty or the inspiring figure who spoke them, but because they carry a universal meaning. They are a reminder that even in the most challenging times, humanity has the power to rise up and find light. Now I want to hear from you. What is the phrase or message that inspires you most in difficult times? Share in the comments. Your answer could be exactly what someone else needs to read to find strength. A message that does not age. The world has changed drastically since 2005 when John Paul I left this plane. Technology evolved, global connections intensified, and new challenges emerged. But in many ways, his words are more relevant today than ever. He spoke of shadows that would cover humanity. Today, we live in a world where social, economic crises, and environmental issues test the limits of our resilience. Polarization, the spread of fake news, and the isolation caused by social media create a scenario where people often feel lost without direction. In this context, John Paul I's message becomes a beacon. When he said that light can be found even in times of darkness, he reminded us that hope exists as long as we are willing to seek it. The light in individual and collective action. John Paul I believed that the transformation of the world begins within each of us. For him, the light was not only a spiritual force, but also a practical force. He encouraged people to act, to stand up against injustice, to help those in need, and to be agents of change in their communities. Today, we can see that light in many forms. Healthcare professionals risking their lives to care for patients during pandemics. Climate activists fighting for a sustainable future for the next generations. Local communities coming together to support the most vulnerable. These acts of kindness and courage are examples of the light that John Paul I described. They show that even when all seems lost, there are still people willing to light the way. A call for personal reflection. Beyond the collective impact, the words of John Paul I also have a profound meaning on an individual level. They invite us to reflect on our own paths. What do we do in moments of doubt? How do we find strength when we feel lost? The final words of John Paul I, "Let yourselves be guided by the light of Christ," offer a final gift to the world. It was a simple phrase, but loaded with depth. He not only reaffirmed his faith, but also conveyed a universal message. There is always something greater, something that can guide us if we are open to it. These words connect directly to the supposed shadow weather forecast. They reinforce the idea that even when things seem to be at their worst, there is a way out. For John Paul I, this path was Christ. For others, it may be hope, compassion, or inner strength. The continuing influence of his legacy. Since his death, John Paul I continues to inspire people around the world. His life, marked by courage, resilience, and compassion, serves as a model of how to face challenges with dignity and purpose. His words continue to be cited in sermons, books, documentaries, and on social media, touching millions of hearts. In times of crisis, his message resurfaces as a reminder that we are not alone. His words invite us to find strength in each other, to work together to overcome obstacles, and to never give up on the search for light. Do you believe that John Paul I's message is still relevant today? How do you apply the idea of seeking the light in your own life? Share your story or opinion in the comments. Your perspective may inspire others to reflect on their own journeys. Let's explore how John Paul I's legacy helps us think about the future and our role in shaping it. An invitation to think about the future we are in and about our role in shaping it. Now I want to ask, how do you imagine the future? What do you think we can do today to guarantee a fuller tomorrow? Leave your opinion in the comments. Together, we can. A future of shadows. John Paul I was never pessimistic. He believed in the human ability to overcome difficulties. For him, the light was not something magical that appeared out of nowhere. It was the result of conscious choices and actions guided by compassion, solidarity, and hope. His supposed prediction, "A time will come in which humanity will be immersed in shadows," seems increasingly relevant in today's world. The climate crisis, the increase in inequalities, political polarization, and the impact of technology on human relations create a scenario that many consider dark. But just as John Paul I suggested, these shadows do not need to be definitive. They can be transformed if each of us decides to act as a source of light. The responsibility of each generation. Pope John Paul II deeply believed in the role of younger generations in building a better future. He often said that young people were the hope of tomorrow, and that their choices would shape the destiny of the world. The current generation is taking responsibility for illuminating a future that seems uncertain. But it's not just young people who have this role. John Paul I reminded us that each person, at any age, has the power to be a force for change. He believed that even the simplest acts, a gesture of kindness, a word of support, could make a significant difference. Technology, a tool or a shadow. A fascinating aspect of the time of shadows predicted by John Paul I is how it can be applied to the digital age. Technology has brought incredible advances, but also new challenges. Social networks, for example, can both connect people and amplify divisions. The Pope's message invites us to reflect on how we use technology. Are we allowing it to bring us closer or further apart? Are we using these tools to spread light, or to delve further into the shadows? Light in global crises. In recent years, we have seen inspiring examples of light emerging in times of crisis. During the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, doctors, nurses, and volunteers showed what it means to put the well-being of others above oneself. These moments remind us that the light is not out of reach. It's in the choices we make every day, in the way we treat others, in how we respond to difficulties, and in the collective effort to face global challenges. The role of faith and spirituality. For John Paul I, faith was one of the greatest sources of light. He believed that the connection with something greater, be it God, nature, or humanity, gave us the necessary strength to face any shadow. But he also recognized that faith was not exclusive to Christianity. He argued that each person could find their own source of light, as long as they sought something that transcended selfishness and promoted the common good. The invitation to action. John Paul I's words were not just a warning but an invitation. He called us to be agents of change, to seek the light in our lives, and to share it with others. And that responsibility is ours. We cannot wait for someone else to bring the light. We need to become that light. We need to look to the future with courage, even when it seems uncertain, and do what is within our power to make it brighter. The future is in your hands. Now it's your turn to reflect. Think about how you can be a source of light in the world. It can be something small, like helping a neighbor, or something bigger, like getting involved in a cause that you believe in. Every gesture counts, every action illuminates the path a little more. John Paul I left the world almost 2 decades ago, but his message remains alive, echoing in every corner of the planet. His words, "Let yourselves be guided by the light of Christ," and the supposed prediction of a time of shadows, are not just a religious legacy, but a universal reminder that even in the most difficult times, humanity has the power to choose hope over despair, unity over division, and light over darkness. Now, before we conclude, I want to ask you, what is the most important lesson that you take from the story and words of John Paul I? Share in the comments. Your reflection could be the inspiration someone else needs. The lasting meaning of his words. Throughout this journey, we explored how John Paul I faced personal and global challenges, how he used his faith and compassion to light the way for millions of people, and how his messages continue to guide us today. He knew that the world would never be free of shadows, but he firmly believed that the power to overcome them resided in each of us. His final words, spoken in a moment of deep vulnerability, carried an incomparable spiritual strength. They were not just a reflection of his life, they were an invitation for all of us to reflect on ours. The light within each of us. John Paul I reminded us that light is not something we need to wait for from the outside. It already exists within us. Each time we choose to be kind, forgive, support someone in need, or fight for justice, we are letting that light shine. But he also challenged us to be a light for others, in a world where the shadows can be overwhelming. Our actions can be the beacon that helps someone find the way. A call to hope and action. the Pope was not a man of empty words. He demonstrated with his life what it means to act with courage and purpose. Whether facing totalitarian regimes, promoting dialogue between religions, or forgiving those who tried to take his life, he showed us that the shadows never have the final word. This message is as necessary today as it was in his time. We live in a world where fear, isolation, and division seem to grow every day, but as John Paul I reminded us, every crisis is also an opportunity, a chance to seek the light and help light the way for others. The choice is ours. At the end of this journey, it is clear that the words and actions of John Paul I are not just memoirs of a great spiritual leader, but a challenge for all of us. He called us to reflect, act, and believe that no matter how dark the night, the light can always prevail. And now, the choice is yours. You can let this story be just that, a story, or you can use it as a starting point to make real changes in your life and the world around you. And you, what inspires you in the words of John Paul I? How can you be a light in times of shadows? Leave your answer in the comments. Your ideas, actions, and reflections can be the beginning of something incredible. A last reflection. Throughout his life, John Paul I faced challenges with courage, faith, and love. He showed us that true light does not just come from great gestures, but from every small act of kindness and compassion. He believed that humanity was capable of extraordinary things, even in the most difficult times. So, as we follow our own journeys, may we remember his words, "Let the light guide us." If this content has inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more reflections and stories like this. Thank you for following along until the next video.